choosing an... While white gets to make the first move in chess, black can also decide the direction of the opening by choosing an opening to fight for the center and put their pieces on good squares. Even though black moves second and is essentially a half step behind white, with good play, black can hope to equalize in the middle game or even gain the advantage. Let's take a look at some key openings for black. After e4, the first two openings we will look at for black focus on preventing white from easily placing another pawn in the center with d4. The most solid of these options is e5, gaining a fair share of space in the center for black and preparing to capture white's pawn if it moves to d4. After the typical knight f3, black has a few reasonable moves in this position. The most common is knight c6. Before looking at this move, let's consider some other options. One option is to play d6. This is known as the Philidor defense. The Philidor is a solid but passive opening. It is considered passive because d6 blocks black's dark-squared bishop from developing toward the center, so the bishop will not control many squares in the opponent's camp early in the game. For this reason, white often plays d4, gaining more space in the center and threatening black's pawn on e5. After e takes d4, knight takes d4. Black would like to play bishop to c5 to put pressure on the knight on d4. Notice the pawn on d6 blocks the bishop from becoming active. Black will have less space to use for development, so black's position will be solid enough, but passive. Another opening choice for black is to play knight f6. This is known as the Petrov or Russian defense. Black counterattacks the e4 pawn instead of protecting e5. After knight takes e5, it's very important for black to play d6. If instead black plays knight takes e4, black is in serious trouble after queen e2. White attacks the knight with the queen. If black tries to defend the knight, say with d5, white will simply attack the knight with d3 and force it to move. If the knight moves right away, say knight f6, white can win black's queen with the nice tactic knight to c6, discovering the queen's check on the king, and also notice the knight threatens to take the queen. Black is going to lose a queen in this position. This is why it is important for black to immediately play d6, attacking white's knight, and after the knight retreats to f3, now black can play knight takes e4. Black plans on playing d5, developing the dark-squared bishop, and castling. Notice if white tries to cause the same issues with queen e2, black can simply play queen e7, unpinning the knight so the knight can safely retreat without losing any material. Let's return to the position after knight to c6. This is black's most popular option, protecting the e5 pawn and developing a piece toward the center. After bishop to c4, the Italian game, black has two main options, bishop to c5 or knight to f6. After knight to f6, white is able to play the aggressive and very dangerous move knight to g5, joining the bishop's attack on f7. As you are starting out, it's best to avoid these complications, where one misstep can lose the game for black. This is why we recommend bishop to c5. Notice that knight g5 is not possible in this position because the queen on d8 protects the g5 square. And after castles and knight f6, black is ready to castle on the next move with a solid position. The other popular opening to put pressure on d4 is the move c5. This is known as the Sicilian defense. Black does not worry about putting a pawn directly in the center to control equal space, but wants to set up an imbalance in the pawn structure right from move 1. White typically plays knight to f3. And after knight to c6, white usually opens up lines with d4. This is known as the open Sicilian. Black does not allow white to keep two pawns in the center and plays c takes d4. Black captures a center pawn, d4, with a wing pawn, c5. A wing pawn is a pawn that is not on the central d or e files. So after knight takes d4, notice that black has two pawns that could move into the center, e7 and d7, while white only has one pawn, e4. Having two pawns that can move into the center can be an advantage for black, but notice that black is behind in development, since black has not made any moves to help develop the kingside. This means that white will usually get to develop pieces to more active squares faster than black can, so white often gets an early attack. The Sicilian is a fighting opening where both sides often get to attack each other in tactically sharp positions. After exploring black's most common defenses to e4, let's go to the challenges.